Okay. Recording this webinar as well. If we don't manage to answer your questions throughout the webinar, we will make sure to get back to you via email. So please don't hesitate to put everything in the chat. And we will be sending a link to the recording afterwards as well. Can you go to the second slide, please? So this is the third webinar in a series of 3, like I said, on the economic benefits of nature-based solutions. And in case you were not there for the first and second webinars, I'll put the links to the recordings there so you can check those out, as well as the PowerPoint presentations after this one, so you can get the full picture. And next slide, please. The goals of today's webinar are to promote ecosystem services and nature-based solution assessment methods, to promote the publication of the guidelines on the economics of nature-based solutions, and to share experiences from the application of the method on 2 sites in Sardinia and in Spain. And next slide, please. And here we have the agenda for today. We will be having a recap on the economics of NbS. We'll have the economic assessment of the NbS tools, and we will be launching the guidelines on the economics of NbS. We'll have a short break, and then we will go into the case studies of Sardinia and Spain, and wrap up with the Q&A. So it's a jam-packed agenda. We hope to do this in under 2 hours, and I'm very confident that we can. And the people who will be helping me do this under 2 hours is some fantastic experts joining us. I have Salma Benzekri from Vertical Lab, who is a consultant in environmental economy with a background in agronomy, engineering, and in environmental management. She holds a master's degree in public policies and environmental strategy. Salma used to work for the French Environmental Ministry on environmental valuation of planning projects and for Veolia's company's environmental plan. And she's now joined Vertical Lab to work on environmental public policies tools, environmental perspective, biodiversity conservation, ecosystem services, nature-based solutions, and subjects linked to environmental economy. And there's just some more people coming in. Then we also have Joanna Boris from BirdLife Europe and Central Asia, who is a biologist with extensive experience in nature conservation. She's worked on different habitat restoration projects within the BirdLife partnership for the last year, and she is working as an IBA officer with us today. And today she will be introducing the TESA tool. Clementine Anglada is a manager and consultant in environmental economics at Vertical Lab. She graduated with a master's degree in applied economics, specializing in environmental risk management, and is specialized in water issues. She has multiple professional experiences in France and Australia in the public, private, and associative sectors. At Vertical Lab, Clementine works on public and environmental policy tools, economic evaluation, environmental forecasting, biodiversity issues, ecosystem services, and nature-based solutions. We also have with us Jesus Pinilla, who is an environmental biologist and has been working for BirdLife's partner in Spain, SEO BirdLife, for the last 25 years. He's now coordinating projects from bird ringing and census to conservation of sites and species. He also represents SEO BirdLife in different regional Andalusian boarding committees, such as Flora and Fauna, Biodiversity, Rural, and Development. And finally, with us today, we have Vanya Statsu, who is an environmental economist with a political and social science as well as statistics background. She's worked for universities and research centers on consumer preferences for green technologies and practices, monetary valuation of ecosystem services, and social capital. She is a founder and vice president at MedSea Foundation, where she's in charge of natural capital and ecosystem service assessments and activities addressed to improve sustainability in the private sector, including agriculture and agri-food, fishing and aquaculture, and tourism. She's the technical coordinator of the Maristanis project that aims at creating a new integrated shared governance model for the 6 Ramsar sites in the area of Oristano, which is the western coast of Sardinia. And she's also an environmental advisor and supports companies and public administrations in the adoption of sustainability indicators, including the UN's social SDGs for 2030. So very impressive panel with us today. Thank you so much. And without any further ado, I pass the floor on to you, Salma.
So, hello everyone. So I am Selma Bedzekri from Vertigo Lab. I am a consultant in environmental economics and ecosystem services, and here I will start this presentation with this introductory part to give some context for the establishment of the methodology on the economics of NbS in the Mediterranean. And it aims at replacing the reasons that brought us to consider NbS as interesting economic opportunities for the Mediterranean coastal wetlands, but also more globally, and to make some case studies in the Mediterranean basin. So first, it is quite important to situate the central concept of wetlands. And as you can see on the screen at the top, wetlands correspond to areas where water covers the soil or is present either at or near the soil surface all year or for varying periods of time during the year, including during the growing seasons. And usually we consider two types of wetlands, coastal wetlands and inland wetlands. And our project here focused on coastal wetlands, but the methodology we have presented during the webinars apply to larger contexts than only wetlands. As you can see, so on the map here, wetlands are very present in the Mediterranean basin. And the legend is that the more countries are colored in dark green, the more they are covered with wetlands. So here some figures are given saying that the Mediterranean wetlands in the Med Basin cover between 1.7 and 2.4% of the total surface over the 27 Mediterranean countries, which is about 18.5 million hectares. So that's a great portion of the Mediterranean soil. And to give you some impactful number also on those wetlands, they represent about 2% of the wetlands globally. So that's a great share. And they enable the Mediterranean region to be and to stand for global biodiversity hotspots. And those wetlands are amongst the most productive ecosystems, such as, for example, lagoons, dunes, deltas, tidal marshes, for example. And our concern today is that the maintenance of the key habitats for biodiversity and multiple benefits to people, so for example, carbon storage or flood protection, they depend on the variable climatic conditions, which leads to important fluctuation during the year in ecosystem extent and function. However, those functions have been really impacted and lately still more impacting, making the Mediterranean as the world's most threatened ecosystem. And as you can see below in the figure, a majority of med wetlands are threatened by the consequences of climate change very deeply. And for example, it has been estimated that 20 to 50%, so a great share, of loss of marshland will be lost due to the sea level rise by 2100. So that's a really threatened ecosystem, and that's why we focus on this ecosystem in this study. Therefore, there exists a real Mediterranean crisis which is at stake. And as some of you know or maybe have been affected, recently drastic events have affected the coastline in the Mediterranean. And here we gave two examples, one in France in 2021 and one also in Sardinia. Which was also reported by our partner from METSI, Vanya. And there has been very tremendous social, economical, and ecological impacts. So this represents a real challenge that has to be tackled. And for this, one of the solutions that we propose and we want to promote is to fight such events and that has now strongly emerged, is to work with and enhance nature to address these societal challenges and safeguard human well-being as well and biodiversity. And this is known as nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions, they correspond to technical answers that we want to defend and that we want to promote for their socioeconomic feathers. So as you may know, those have been defined by the IUCN as actions to protect, sustainably manage and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptatively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So they correspond to a transformative transition to sustainable balance between ecological preservation and ecosystem resilience, but also economic growth through sustainable provision of ecosystem services to society. And they also provide multiple benefits for society and biodiversity that can be related to as ecosystem services, just as I will explain and show in the next slide. So more precisely, ecosystem services are the aspects of ecosystem that actively or passively produce human well-being and are only services or goods once they are used by human beneficiaries. So they had benefits, all the benefits that are provided by nature to people at the local, regional, and global scales, and which bring human survival and economic health and well-being and social well-being. These ecosystem services are produced as a result of ecosystem processes and functions, such as soil formation, and then they flow to people in the form of benefits and goods supporting human well-being. And according, as you can see, so on the graphic in the center in pink, and according to the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, there exist three main types of ecosystem services. The provisioning services that enable to produce food, water for human subsistence. For example, that could be crops production or fish production, as in the picture. Regulation and maintenance services that can enable to regulate natural processes, for example, global climate regulation, flood protection, water quality improvement, for example. And finally, the cultural services that enable to participate as cultural and that are part of cultural, recreative, and touristic feeders. So, for example, the landscape amenities that are provided by a natural area. So we have also seen during those two first webinars that NbS can address the loss of ecosystem services and tackle climate and societal challenges. And they are closely intertwined with ecosystem services and play a significant role in the social and ecological system, as you can see on this diagram, which was adapted from a publication of Nathalie Seddon, with a reference on the subject of NbS. So as you can see, NbS can support ecosystems in having a greater adaptive capacity to counteract the impact from pressures. So those pressures can be floods that can, for example, that can alter the functions and processes of an ecosystem. And their resulting flows of ecosystem services provide socioeconomic benefits to society and really need to be maintained in business operations for a long-term sustainability of those operations. So that said, if implemented in a way to increase the resilience of coastal ecosystems with the ecosystem services flow, NbS can effectively provide work opportunities, empower society and communities, in conserving ecosystems with a sustainable socioeconomic development. So in this figure, we see how NbS enabled to adapt to ecosystem and socioeconomic system climate change impact by adapting to their constraints and entering in a social ecological vulnerability framework. So more concretely, once we have shared with you those definitions, those webinars were an occasion to present several NbS types depending on the NbS characteristics in terms of ecosystem services engineering level and the ecosystem services that the NbS tackle. And therefore, NbS actions and implementation will be different depending on the goal at your site. So it is important to know what you really want to achieve at your site if you want to put in place an NbS. And here on the screen, there is an example of an NbS to tackle coastline erosion and coastal floods. And with this aim, the action plan were to make a sustainable and improved management for dune protection. So that was the first action. To then rehabilitate the dunes by maintaining the vegetation and restore Posidonia, which was the third action. So that way, a bunch of services values were increased, such as, for example, carbon storage and sequestration, biodiversity and coastal landscape enhancement, or even cultural and tourism services. So now I will pass to the second part. So I will talk about the economic assessment of NbS methodology that we have proposed during the webinars 1 and 2. And we have gone through more details in those webinars, so don't hesitate to watch the videos again of the previous webinars to know more about this methodology. And the publication that we will later provide you provide a complete handbook on how to make an economic assessment of NbS. So we will give you access also in a few moments. But I will quickly go through the principles of the economic assessment of NbS methodology. So here you can see the 5 major steps of the economic assessment of NbS that was developed and implemented in the frame of our work. Step 1 is the identification and characterization of ecosystem services on a site. The step 2 enables to make an economic valuation of goods and services provided by ecosystems. Step 3 gives the method to make a benefit valuation of the NbS actions.
Yes, and even 5 minutes.
And step 4 gives guidelines to estimate the costs of NbS relatively to the conventional solution. And step 5 is the conclusion of the process, enabling to analyze and compare the costs and benefits of NbS in regard to a conventional solution, tackling the same challenges. And it enables to draw out conclusion on the interest of the solution on a socioeconomic perspective. So in parallel, all along the process of the ecosystem services assessment, as you can see on the left of the slide, you should be sure to engage stakeholders of the area for them to take part in the decision process, but also to share their knowledge and their own knowledge of the area. And this stakeholder engagement is a key element for the methodology. So it has to be done since the very start of the whole work. If we go more in the principle of the ecosystem services assessment, several methods can be applied and appropriate depending on the services and the context of the site that we assess. The first is the market prices. So it applies, as you can see, to a good or service that may be exchanged on the market. And the idea is to use the market price. So if the good is traded or the market equivalent price if the good is not traded, to attribute the value of the service. So the market price is the value of traded or non-traded provisioning goods as supposedly sold in a perfectly competitive market. And this usually applies to provisioning services, such as, for example, crop production. The second method is the avoided cost. So this method applies to the modified services that may be restored through diverse means. And they are the costs that would have to be engaged if the ecosystem function was not ensured anymore by the given natural habitat. So usually we use it for global climate regulation, water-related services, for example, or coastal protection services. And to give you a quick example here, if a wetland protects adjacent property from flooding, the flood protection benefits may be estimated by the damages costs that would be avoided thanks to the presence of the wetland, or also by the expenditures that property owners could make to protect their property from this flooding event. The third method is the replacement costs. So it applies to the services that may be reproduced by diverse means and usually artificial means. And those are the costs that are incurred to artificially reproduce the ecological functions that are performed by the natural ecosystem. And for example, the coastal erosion protection service of a coastal wetland can be provided by a dike, and so the value of this service will be the cost to implement a dike. And finally, the last method to use would be the value or benefits transfer, and it applies to and it's really the last method to use when no other method was possible given the data available on the site. And it uses data from other studies on similar or close ecosystems and adapts it to the local context. So this method really has to be taken with care because it's really adapting values to your sites, and so it's less robust than the other ones. So here we just reiterate how and why we assess NbS through our methodology. So studying the impact of future NbS actions will enable to draw adapted recommendation to enhance the preservation of a given site by highlighting the socioeconomic impacts from the nature-based solution scenario. And that way, it enables to compare the benefits engendered by an NbS scenario over a statu quo option scenario, as shown on the figure. And this figure really illustrates what is calculated thanks to our methodology. So we calculate the difference between the total economic value of ecosystem services in the future generated by an NbS scenario and the total economic value of ecosystem services in the future generated by a statu quo scenario in the center. And the current state valuation on the left is only used at the start of the study to have a reference value from which we can make the evolution estimates. So for example, we can estimate that regulation and maintenance services will be enhanced by an NbS scenario and diminished by a statu quo scenario, as it's the case on the fictive example on the screen. So if we go more in the 5 steps, so for step 1, you will have to establish the site context and diagnosis, and the goals are to study the site boundaries and characterize the habitats, to identify the pressures and threats that happen on the habitat of your site, to identify the current practices of and the NbS possible actions that could be implemented on the site. And finally, to classify and prioritize the services that are provided by the habitats on the site. And to gather those elements, you should ask yourselves the following questions. So, what is your goal? What you are trying to change? What is your strategy to do so? The decisions or policies that you want to influence, that be existing relevant national policy, planning frameworks, etc. What the physical boundaries of your site are, what the ecological, economical, cultural, political context of your site is, and who the stakeholders of your site are, and who could be involved in the assessment. So those could be beneficiaries locally, nationally, or globally, but also decision makers, for example. The second step, you will want to assess the economic value of your ecosystem services by quantifying the amount and net economic value of the site. So for this, you will have to collect the necessary data for this assessment, and the data could be qualitative data. So for example, the description of the practices that are made on the site, if it's agriculture, for example, if it's agriculture, or example, salt production. Also quantitative data, so the production volume of salt, for example, of our crops, and the monetary data, so what's the price of the production and what's the cost of the damages if you want to use the avoided cost method. Then the third step, for the first step, the aim is to highlight the benefits of the NbS actions. So for this, you will have to elaborate and characterize future alternative scenarios for the site and estimate the impacts of scenarios on the services and beneficiaries. So to do so, the adapted format is usually to make workshops with the pertinent local stakeholders in order to detail the scenarios and their impact on ecosystem services value. And usually we use, as you can see here, one business as usual or statu quo scenario and one NbS scenario, and try to characterize for each of those scenarios the time frame. So for example, you can say we want to estimate in 2040 what will be the evolution of our ecosystem services value. You want also to determine the ultimate natural health goal that you want to reach with the NbS, the pressures and threats that could be observed in the long term, the site management operations that are planned, also the impacts of pressures and threats on ecosystem services provision, and finally, the habitats answer to the different management operations. The fourth step is to focus on the costs, now that we have estimated the benefits in the first step. So the aims are to study the costs of NbS implementation and to consider the planning, management, and maintenance costs. So for each of NbS and business as usual scenarios, you will estimate the costs of the scenario in the long term, and make sure to be the most exhaustive possible in the description to avoid also, and also to avoid the double counting of the costs. So those estimates can be investment costs that are made punctually on the considered time frame, usually in euros, and or maintenance and management costs that are recurrent on the time period and expressed in euros per year. So here the table gives you examples of costs that can be considered in the assessment. And finally, this conclusive step is made to compare the costs and the benefits that are associated for each scenario. And therefore, you will compare for each one how much the site represents in terms of ecosystem services value for the benefit side in blue on the left, and how much the NbS solution implementation maintenance in the long term would cost. So on the cost side on the right in orange, and that way you will compare this for each scenario, and you will be able to determine if it is or not worth investing in an NbS to contribute to the site sustainable management and the provision of ecosystem services. And again, for further details on the methodology, you can refer to webinars 1 and 2, and or to the handbook that we will provide you later on. So now I will pass the floor to Clementine, who will explain better how Vertigo Lab can bring a solution to you to make ecosystem services assessment of NbS.
Thank you, Selma. Hello, everyone. So as Selma said, I'm just going to present you to provide you with a quick presentation of Vertigo Lab, who we are and what we do. So next slide, please. So Vertigo Lab is a French consultancy. We are specialized in environmental economics. We are hosted in Bordeaux's green economy business incubator that's called the Darwin Ecosystem. We're a think and do tank, and we're a team of about 15 consultants now, all specialized in environmental management, policy evaluation, and environmental economics. We work for local, European-wide, and internationally recognized institutions and companies. So our goal is to carry out evaluation, consulting, and expertise missions for economic actors and territories on ecological transition and territorial development. So our areas of intervention include climate change, terrestrial and marine biodiversity, fisheries and aquaculture, agroecology, agriculture, circular economy, biomimicry, etc. We're also a member of many groups, for example, the Science-Based Target Network, the Foundation for Research on Biodiversity, or the French Committee of IUCN. Our expertise on the ecosystem services economic assessment is based on 10 years of practical and operational experience to assist public, private, and not-for-profit institutions in achieving a diversity of custom-made objectives, from building advocacy campaigns on natural management to evaluate the efficiency and socioeconomic impact and opportunity of nature-based solution strategies. So we've listed here a short list of studies and projects that we have recently worked on. We aim for achieving operational and providing useful recommendations. So, for example, we've provided a number of studies for the French Conservatoire du Littoral, which is a nationwide public organization that protects natural areas on the French coast. And our studies have, for example, assisted the institution in advocating towards the French First Minister in favor of banning some unsustainable recreational activities. And so thanks to this work, those unsustainable activities were then stopped. Another insightful feedback that we wanted to share with you today that we've recently received is that our results contribute on a regular basis to pleading against mangrove demolition in overseas France. And our estimates on civil society costs or on the restoration values that we've estimated, they are often used as a reference values in court. So that's really, really exciting for our team to know that our work directly and indirectly benefits the environmental purpose in the end. Now I'm going to present the practical solution that we've developed through the years of studies and projects. So the methodology that Selma presented and that Jesus and Vanya are going to present also today in today's webinar is highly inspired in the methodological framework that we've also developed. So here we've developed a complete toolkit made of canvas, tables, resources, and recommendations that can assist a site manager in developing an ecosystem services assessment and a cost-benefit analysis of nature-based solution options. So just quickly, on a very logical basis, we first usually start with, as Selma presented, a site diagnosis, which is a crucial step to better understand the context, the perimeter, and the ecosystem services that are in place. So for example, here we provide a list of questions to help the site manager define its perimeter to better understand and organize its habitats description, coupling it usually with a GIS treatment. We also provide material for ecosystem services description, prioritization, beneficiaries identifications, etc. We then operate an NbS discussion in order to determine the best solution and options to go for based on the context and site objectives. So here, for example, we provide a complete list of NbS that are organized and classified depending on the challenge they respond to, the ecosystem service they address, or other topics related to the NbS to assist the site manager in defining its NbS option. We also provide methods on how to collate data on costs and how to categorize them. Then we've also, once we've collected a sufficient amount of data and qualitative information, we also, Vertigo provide a tailor-made economic analysis, which is a complete guidance on the choice to make for economic methods. We also organize or help organize consultation workshops, for example. And finally, our toolkit provides with practical tools and indicators to help monitor and assess the success of the options that the site manager has opted for. So just quickly, our solution is made of turnkey solutions and canvas that can be shared on demand for new case studies. So if you're interested to work with us, please get in touch with us. Then a last slide I just wanted to present today is that our approach is often combined with another solution that we have developed to assess socioeconomic impacts of nature-based solutions on territories. So the solution is the last slide I'll present today. So it's called ImpactAir, and it is based on territorial diagnosis. As an example, our tool provides estimations of socioeconomic and environmental impacts that a nature-based solution or a combination of nature-based solution strategies can have on the local GDP or on the number of employment that are created or supported by the NbS. So thanks to this model, we can estimate direct, indirect, and induced impacts of NbS strategy. So if you're interested in assessing the impact of your NbS strategy on your region, on your district, or on the country, please get in touch with Vertigo Lab. So this last slide is just our contact details for more information. And yeah, just now I will leave the floor to Joanna from BirdLife, who will present the inspiring TESA methodology. Joanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Clementine. So as Hani said, I'm Joanna Bores, and I'm going to present TESA, Toolkit for Ecosystem Service Site-Based Assessment. Next, please. So TESA is an innovative practical toolkit that provides a cost-effective and scientifically appropriate methodological framework. And this tool enables stakeholders with limited capacity, time, and resources to gather accessible, robust, and locally relevant ecosystem service information and assessment. This approach, as you may know, has been relatively little used because it has been assumed that ecosystem services are technically difficult and expensive to measure. So to overcome this obstacle, TESA has been designed. It provides practical guidance for conservation practitioners on how to identify different things, such as which services might be significant at the site of interest, what data is needed to measure them, what methods or sources can be used to obtain this data, and how to communicate the results. That is really important. Next slide, please. It's important to understand the impacts on ecosystem services of changes in the state of the sites. So the goal is to promote better decisions to support both biodiversity conservation and ecosystem service delivery. TESA compares estimates for alternative states of a site. So, for example, before and after conversion to agriculture of one of the sites, so that decision makers can assess the net consequences of such a change. It is possible also to assess the benefits of human well-being that may be lost through the change or gained by conservation. The alternative state is a reasonable description of an alternative land cover, land use of the site based on particular policy actions or decisions that are being taken at the site. Next one, please. So which are the goals of this tool and the target audience? So TESA is designed to allow users to develop an understanding of benefits we receive from nature and assess their value in order to generate information for decision making. This methodology is applicable to a wide range of users. So forestry, fisheries, water managers, land use planners, for example, development organization, and many others. Next one, please. So, okay, you decide to download TESA. What the toolkit includes? So it includes a step-by-step framework, 6 steps that I will explain the details later on how it works. Decision trees for methods, detailed methods, additional guidance templates, work examples. So we have been working, and I will explain you in many other sites, and we will send you also the reports we produce and guidance on data synthesis. Next one, please. So as you can see, a lot of organizations have been involved in the development and improvement of this tool. And this team continues to meet and coordinate the work as self-appointed TESA steering committee, with additional members joining as the work expands. Next one. So this is the map of the site that I already mentioned, where TESA is being used worldwide. At the beginning of the MAVA project, we did not have any site that applied these methods in the Mediterranean basin. And at this moment, as you can see, we have 4 sites, and we invite you and new coastal wetlands to join the TESA team. Next one, please. Also, although this toolkit is designed to be accessible to non-experts, understanding ecosystem services can be fairly technical, so relevant experience or training may be needed, like some scientific training to understand basic sampling methods or statistic production of graphs or presentation of the data. Some training in socioeconomic methods could be useful also, and it will be really useful to have competent computer skills. Next one, please. So, as TESA has been changing and improving over the time, we have different versions. The most recent one is the beta version 2, with the cultural, as you can see below in the diagram, the cultural and the coastal protection and the pollination modules. So in total, we have 8 ecosystem services chapters. But in November 2022, a new version will be launched, so the beta version 3 of TESA, and it will integrate a new natural capital framework, and the entire toolkit have been reviewed. Next one, please. So, as I said before, TESA is a step-by-step framework, which are the steps that we need to follow to do this analysis. The first step is the preparation. So what is the objective? For example, you want to support better environmental management of a site, or understand the impacts that the development may have. So for example, if you have an agricultural expansion in the site, you need to understand the impacts of this agricultural expansion. What is your assessment site? Is a protected area, is an important bird and biodiversity area? Who are the stakeholders at the site? How do you want to communicate the result? This is the first step. Know how you are going to do the study in the future. The second step is the preliminary scoping appraisal. So for this scoping assessment, we recommend to hold a single workshop with all the key stakeholders to obtain the basic information. For example, what impact will have on different group of people in terms of benefit they get from the site. It's going to be better for the people that is working there. They are going to obtain something with this change. It is particularly important to engage local stakeholders in this process, okay? So the third step is determine the alternative state. The alternative state should be a representation of a realistic and likely future change based on management or policy changes that you already identify in the step 1. The step 4, planning the full assessment. There are a number of stages involved in the test assessment, and it depends really on prior knowledge of the site and availability of the data and resources. The step 5, so collect the data. The important things to consider when you are collecting the data is, for example, to organize a sampling strategy so you are collecting all the data in the same way. You need to ensure the quality of your data, estimate the cost of this collection, no? To know how, if you have this budget in previous to do this collection of the data. And the last step is the number 6, analyze and communicate the result. That is really important because interpretation and clear communication of the findings is critical if the assessment is to be used to influence and in any decision-making processes. No, TESA is not a strict formula, so all methods are designed to adapt according to the specific context. Next one, please, and last one. So the methods and approaches presented in this toolkit have been tested in different contexts and countries of the world, as you saw in the map before. And BirdLife International support partners to apply this TESA at 3 sites in the Mediterranean coastal, 3 coastal wetlands in the Mediterranean basin. In the first phase of the MAVA project. So Montenegro, Ulcin Salina, Sardinia, Oristano, and Tunisia, Garelmela. And the goal was to assess the ecosystem services at the site. This enabled our partners to inform policymakers and provide first recommendations. So, for example, in Montenegro, in Ulcin Salina, the results were considered for the development of a management plan for the Salina. Can you please reproduce the video? Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Next slide, please. So that's all. Thank you so much for listening. I don't know if Hani already shared some links. If not, I will share you the complete video and the link to download the toolkit. Thank you, and give the floor to Selma, that is going to present the guidelines.
Thank you. So today, as Joanna said, we are very happy to launch the outcomes of the long-term reflection in the frame of the MAVA project. So this work has been created as a result of a lot of knowledge gathered on the economics of NbS and of the methodology that we have implemented with our partners. And our guidelines provide a document that is divided into 2 parts, as you can see here on the screen. So the global title is the Economics of Nature-Based Solutions and the Opportunities for the Mediterranean Coastal Wetlands, and it also applies to to larger contexts. So part one is a state-of-the-art on the NbS implementation and the key challenges to unleash and initiate their operationalization from a global perspective and with a focus on the economic feeders for coastal wetlands. And it provides state-of-the-art on NbS implementation, so the key challenges and the focus on economic feeders and financial opportunities also. The second part is a handbook for socio-economic and environmental assessment of NbS. And this report is published as part of the MAVA funded project to improve and share knowledge in order to promote NbS and their scale up in the Mediterranean and more globally. And in particular, to bring light economic and business arguments for NbS. So it provides a practical guidance to make a socioeconomic and environmental assessment of NbS, but also decision aiding tools, templates to help make the assessment and case studies. So basically, to assess NbS ecosystem services, you can refer to this kind of methodology or to TESA methodologies, as presented before and as presented in the publication also. So to have access to the document, you will have the link in the chat and also on the screen. And it is noted that this version that we provide comprise the methodology principles, but if you want to deepen about those subjects and about the methodology, don't hesitate to contact us directly to know more. And now I will pass the floor to
I could take
Ronnie.
over. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. We have a very short 5-minute comfort break, and we will start again at 3 o'clock sharp. Please don't leave the Zoom call, just stay muted, keep your cameras off, and we will start in 5 minutes. Bye. Time flies when you're on a break. So if you guys can hear me, if you can slowly start coming back. Oh, look at my wonderful speakers waiting for me for my call. Give it 1 minute. Very sorry for the short break, but I'd rather we finish on time. Okay, I hope that everyone had a nice quick break, and we are gonna go right back into this. So now we're going to be listening to the presentation of the MBS assessment assessments for a site in Sardinia and another in Spain. And we'll be starting with Sardinia and with Vanya.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Vanya Statu from the MSc Foundation. We are based in Sardinia. This afternoon, we will present the Senarubia Lagoon case study. Next, please. Okay, ecosystem services assessment is one of the activities included in the Maristanis project, a 5-year-long project co-financed by MAVA Foundation that aims at creating a new governance model in the 6 Ramsar site of the Gulf of Oristano. According to IUCN, the entire Maristanis project could be considered a unique nature-based solution. All the stakeholders settled or operating in the area have been involved since 2017 in the Maristanis activities, and specific projects were developed with them. All the stakeholders, also starting since 2018, are involved in the identification of ecosystem services according to the TESA methodology. Several nature-based solution activities are ongoing in the area, and especially those that we include in the analysis according to the guidelines provided by Vertigo Lab are included in the Coastal Wetland Contract Action Plan. This is a voluntary instrument that is allowed by the national legislation to create a cooperation from private and public sector to better manage water ecosystems. Next, please. Concerning this phase, we work on 2 areas. Today, we will present only the area of Senarubia Lagoon. This is the remaining part of the larger wetland that was reclaimed 1 century ago. Today in the area operated a camping that is located in the Pinewood inside the Ramsar site, 6 farming companies, all cultivated ryegrass and maize. 2 of them are cattle breeding also. 4 companies are associated with the Cooperativa Produttori Arborea, and 2 are associated to Latte Arborea Cooperative. Today, this is one of the main dairy sector areas in Italy, and also one of the big agri-food areas in Italy, and one of the most important economic area in the Sardinia region. All the lagoons and ponds in Sardinia belongs to the regional government, who gave to some fishing cooperative the permission to operate in these areas. In the case of Senarubia, is the Sant'Andrea Fishing Cooperative, who is in charge for fishing and maintain the area. They also create an agri-food company called Arrubia to manage invasive species, especially brook crab, who are harvested and then sold in a ready-to-use product. Next. Okay, stakeholder engagement started from 2019 when an enlarged physical meeting with all relevant stakeholders, including citizens, was organized to identify relevant threats and perceived trends of the area, the relevant ecosystem services provided by the lagoon, and also the perceived trends of these ecosystem services. A side activities was organized to identify also the marine ecosystem, so that was really important for our local stakeholders. Data collection consists in identify and collect all existing data and studies, especially the regional government. Some studies, as the one that I put in the slide, are also made by us collaborating with some university. Face-to-face interview to collect information by farmer, fisherman, campsite manager, and also the major on current and especially alternative state. And also we conduct some surveys. For example, we create a questionnaire to collect information with the farmers, and also two questionnaires, one addressed to tourists, face-to-face, and also CAWI using LEM survey to collect information on tourists and visitors' activities and expenses in the area, and the other addressed to residents to identify the relevant cultural ecosystem services in the area. In 2019, an online survey was also conducted to collect information of the ecosystem services provided by all the 6 sites involved in the Maristanis project, and evaluated their perceived importance with a combination of expert-based and citizens-based evaluation. Next. During the pandemic period, we have to change our way to work with the local stakeholders. We work especially asking directly the information by phone or WhatsApp, or during multi-objective, multi-project meetings, also to maximize stakeholders' participation. Several data and information was already collected in the framework of all the Maristanis activities, and information nature-based solution was collected by the MSC team involved in the Maristanis coastal wetland contract. The participatory process we organize for the Maristanis coastal wetland contract was also an opportunity to collect information on climate change consequences and also perceive the trends in the future. Next. Concerning Senarubia, as I told before, is a semi-artificial area that was reclaimed to control flood, to reduce malaria disease, and to create a farming area. Main habitats are so the coastal sandy beach with the dunes, the artificial pine wood that was planted 1 century ago, the salt marshes surrounding the lagoon, and the agricultural area. In front of the Senarubia, but along all the Gulf of Oristano, there is a large Posidonia oceanica meadow that is really important to control for climate change consequences. In the past decades of the last century, the main problem for Senarubia was pollution due to the lack of management of slurries and manure from the cattle breeding. But in 2005, after the introduce in the regional legislation of the constraints by the nitrate directive, the EU nitrate directive, this problem was solved, and now pollution is minimum in the area. The really big issue is climate change, and especially inland floods that unfortunately we don't estimate in this study due to the lack of some very relevant information. We concentrate on the coastal area. Next. Concerning the economic evaluation ecosystem services, we mainly refer to the TESA methodology, but with some adjustment. For example, for the global climate regulation, we use not the IPCC emission factors, but where there was available, we use a national emission factor coefficient provided by the Ministry of the Environment. So monetary evaluation in that case for the CO2 emitted or stocked was the amount of CO2 emitted or stocked multiplied by the price of a CO2 equivalent As in Italy, we don't have a carbon tax, we use an average EU value. Concerning flood protection, we use the avoided damage cost. I will explain better later. And for the coastal erosion, the avoided cost of defense infrastructure. I will give you detailed information later. Provisioning ecosystem services includes both farming and fishing products, and was estimated using market price, but in the alternative states, we consider also climate change consequences. Indeed, not all negative consequences of climate change could be controlled acting at local level, especially those that are related to the increase of average temperature will produce some negative consequences even if we act today to reduce them using nature-based solution. Concerning cultural ecosystem services, we focus on the tourism and that we estimate using the travel cost method and also with market prices information provided by the campsite manager. Next. The business as usual scenario is the current scenario management cost, but we take into consideration consequences of climate change in the future, that is 2040. We use 2014 because it's the last reference year in the very recent IPCC scenario. Using several different references suggested by expert, local companies, or the analysis of recent data, we estimated that there will be a reduction in fishing revenues of the 53%, of farming revenues and tourism revenues of 25%, and also changes in costs based on the hypothesis that we made. A change in the capacity of the stock and the CO2 emitted in the future that will be based on the reduction of the size of the habitat due to coastal flood and coastal erosion, but also based on the fact that the increase in the average temperature will reduce the performances of the vegetation habitats. Next. Concerning nature-based scenario, we was based on the current ongoing project or similar project. Main actions are dune restoration with naturalistic solutions like protection screens, protection bioreactors, naturalization with planting native species, and so on. Replanting the pines that are dead or perishing, using new plants of the same species. Replanting the native species of Posidonia oceanica to restore the meadows that are degraded. Next. Concerning the coastal erosion and flood protection, we use avoided cost to estimate the values. For the coastal erosion, we estimated the cost to build a green infrastructure that could provide the same effect of protection of the area of a nature-based solution, and we make the sand injected CO2 breakwaters hypothesis that was positioned longitudinal to the coastline with a height of 3 meters, that is enough to avoid the coastal floods, with geotubes that are positioning in double row. The intervention site is 2.5 kilometers long and the lifetime is 25 years. Concerning the flood protection, we consider the main 3 events of Medicane, so Mediterranean hurricanes and cyclones that happened in Sardinia in the past 8 years. That was a mixture of coastal and inland floods. And we estimated the average cost of damages per municipalities, and we used this value to estimate flood protection. All the values are discounted at 3% rate of interest. We use 3% because we use the reference provided by the EU directive. Next. Concerning the benefit, you can see the nature-based solution alternative status have the double of benefit from the business as usual, and this is able to provide more benefit than today. We don't put benefits from the current state and the BAU for flood protection and coastal erosion, because these are included in the provision in agricultural services. So to avoid double counting, we don't include additional benefits. Next. Concerning the cost estimation, the work was really huge. I need to say thanks to my colleague Francesca Ezzi, who provides all these data, because for the global climate regulation, we calculated the CO2 emitted and stocked in each habitat, and also the CO2 emitted for each relevant economic activity, include cattle breeding, farming activity, and fishing. Concerning flood protection, we use the data provided that we collect in the regional government documents or in local newspaper about the damages of the floods. Concerning coastal erosion, we estimated the cost of build the green infrastructure using, of course, the cost of the employment and also for the material acquisition for build this green infrastructure, and also the cost of preliminary studies that are compulsory according to national legislation for public works. For provisioning ecosystem services, we collect information by questionnaires and interview from farming and fishermen, collect information on revenues and cost per hectares or per kilo of fish harvested. Cultural ecosystem services, we ask interviews the cost or the maintenance of the campsite, which is the main tourist attraction in the area. Next. I will give you a very quick idea of the cost. But for example, for the current state business as usual scenario, we collect information for the maintenance activity, which are especially extraordinary maintenance activities by the local administration, and information also for the staff cost. We need to work asking information for the regional and municipal staff costs, because both public administration are involved in the management of this area, because the Senarubia is also a Natura 2000 site, so is in charge of the regional government. And we make some also hypotheses to estimate the staff cost. Next. Concerning the maintenance intervention, we ask, for example, regional forest agency, who is responsible for the ordinary and extraordinary maintenance of the pine wood in the area, to provide the data of the current activities. And we collect all the information required to calculate this cost according to national legislation. So, for example, we include also the number of travels to transport the waste collected in the area to the disposal area, which is one of the costs that are included in the waste cost management in Italy. Next. Concerning the investment cost, we follow the national legislation. So we include all the previous studies, all the preliminary studies that are compulsory, with a market investigation to evaluate the cost in the area, and also all the costs for the 3 levels of the project that are required by national legislation. To identify the costs, we use the parametric costs that are provided by the regional government and that are compulsory in Italy for the public works. Next. This is just an example of all the information that was required to estimate the cost of the restoration of the dune or for the pine planting. Next. And also for the Posidonia oceanica restoration. In that case, we use the same cost that was borne by Metsi in another project, Metsi Grass, that is ongoing in the Gulf of Oristano to restore the Posidonia. So we could use this reference to insert the information in the area. And also we included the legal and administrative fees that are compulsory for each kind of public works in Italy. Next. And also for the maintenance cost, we refer to the legislation that include that some monitoring activity are compulsory, and also some that are suggested by experts that practice this activity. Next. Next, it was just an example. Next, thank you. Okay, cost estimation measure. Okay, we can see here that the total cost for the nature-based solution is higher than the above. But we need to outline that currently investing in managing coastal wetlands are really low today, and discounting in the future is lower, of course. Concerning the current state for coastal erosion, at the moment, the coastal erosion phenomena are not registered in the current state, so they are not cost for Senarubia. In the above version, there could be coastal erosion phenomenon, and the cost is included in the reduction in the revenues from tourism. So we, to avoid double counting, we do not include an additional cost. And concerning nature-based solution, the nature-based solution that we include in the analysis are able to contrast some surge and coastal erosion. So the cost is included in the cost management plus intervention voice that we put at the end. Next. If we compare nature-based solution with the business as usual, we can see that the benefits are quite higher, are 42% higher, even if also the costs related are higher than BAU, but the benefits are larger than the costs. So it's really useful to invest in nature-based solution. Of course, if we compare with the current state, despite costs are higher than benefit, we can see that nature-based solution will improve the situation also than today. Nature of costs are larger than benefit also in nature-based solution because, as I told you before, climate change affect also elements, especially some revenue, like for example, production in agriculture that we cannot contrast with nature-based solution. At the moment, we cannot contrast at all. So we know that there will be some issues that could affect the monetary value, but with this study, we demonstrated that nature-based solution is able to contrast, and we will have more benefit than the business as usual and current state, investing an amount of money that is reliable and able to be supported with the current characteristic of the municipality. Municipalities and regional government. Next. Communication activities. The results will be disseminated in the next months and address some activities that will be addressed to civil servants, local environmental activists, local companies, especially the ones settled in the area, teachers and students, because people in the schools asked us to be taught about ecosystem services. And the communication activities will be organized in the coming months with articles in the website, posts in social networks, and so on, because the activities of Maristanis are not concluded, and there could be also some other ways to use these results. Next. Okay, difficulties. There are some elements that was difficult to deal with. There were several elements that we need to take into account working on climate change because there were really a lot of variables, and so it was not so easy to understand the possible consequences on the multiple ecosystem services provided by the area. Time frame in selection is not easy when you have to identify an alternative state, for example, in the case of nature-based solution, but also climate change, more reliable information are in the long term, why it's difficult to provide an analysis of economic activities in the medium and long term. Another point of interest was the perception of the key challenges. We focused on coastal erosion because it was considered one of the main current issues by stakeholders. This activity is also part of the action plan of the Maristanis Coastal Wetland Contract because it was asked this analysis. But when we performed the analysis with TESA methodology, comparing satellite and aerial pictures, we demonstrated that currently no coastal erosion is in the current state in this site. It could happen in the future, we know, because there are several projections that indicate that, but at the moment there is no. So this is an element that was important for us to outline. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Vanya. And now we're redirecting towards Spain and Jesus.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Honey, and thank you all, guys, for your attendance. I'll promise to do my very best to be not too boring with this presentation. The next slide, you can see that as it has already been presented today, any initiative intended to change perspectives, attitudes, or management practices must be able to engage relevant local stakeholders to be successful. In our case, since our place is a natural park, the regional administration, Junta de Andalucía, is a key stakeholder to work with. But we've also been able to engage the University of Cadiz, some local organizations, local consultancies, and also municipalities, local governments. Well, it's true that the Blue Natura Life project, which was an initiative designed to assess how tidal marshes act as carbon sinks, and it was recently carried out in the area, helped to prepare the ground for us and well, to engage all these local stakeholders. Well, let's move into step one of the process, which is the site diagnosis. Our area, the Bahía de Cádiz Nature Park, is located in southern Spain. And here, both natural and man-made marshland coexist. These man-made marshlands have been historically used for salt and fish productions. These plots are known as salinas. The word comes from the Spanish word sal, means salt. And these sites are places where salt is produced, salinas. The whole natural park comprises around 10,500 hectares. And as you can see in this slide, almost half of it are salinas, but we've also have vegetated marshland, mudflats, tidal channels, dunes, and beaches. Let's move on with the site diagnosis. If what is intended is that we propose nature-based solutions, these solutions must address identified problems. Which are the problems here? The first one is the abandonment the abandonment of the salinas when they are not profitable anymore. This abandonment derives in barren, hypersaline soils that lose their capacity of acting as carbon sinks. But this is not the only problem. The next slide, we can see that in the coastline, significant erosion rates have been recorded, and up to 2 meters in a 10-year period of dunes have been lost. Finally, there's also flood risk. The next slide, we can see that this risk is present within and in the nearabouts of the natural park. So now that we've identified the problems, let's have a look at some of the ecosystem services that the site provides. We have selected these 3: global climate regulation, the coastal protection, and the flood regulation. In the evaluation process, next slide, please. As it has already been said and presented here, we compare 2 alternative scenarios in a predefined period. In our case, we have selected a 50-year period. Being these 2 scenarios, the status quo, the business as usual scenario, and an alternative one, where the nature-based solutions would have been implemented. And the difference between these 2 scenarios are economically evaluated. So what happens here in our site? And the next slide, please. The site was protected around 30 years ago, precisely to preserve the natural values derived from the traditional management, now abandoned. So the development and the management plans have been designed to recover those activities, which are salt and aquaculture production. However, it's obvious that the present situation and the foreseen evolution of salt and fish markets will not be able to bear the recovery of the whole set of abandoned salinas on a traditional management basis. So other scenarios should be considered to improve the environmental performance of the site. And here is where our nature-based solution scenario comes into the picture. If such a large area of abandoned salinas can't be recovered as salt or fish production sites, there are not enough resources for that, why don't we revert some parts as natural marshes? Natural marshes where the tidal influence would be allowed to recover those lost habitats. And why should we do that? Well, let's have a look first at the habitat differences between the business as usual scenario, abandoned salinas, and the NbS scenario, the natural marshes. Yeah, we have used the data from the live Blue Natura, and here we've performed a habitat assessment using GIS tools. And as you can see here, in this table, there are significant differences in the proportion of the habitats between these 2 scenarios. Please pay attention to the figures of the mid-marshland habitat. This is a habitat that develops between 1.3 and 1.8 meters above the sea level. And the vegetal community here is dominated by sarcocornia species. Now, in the next slide, let's have a look at the performance of each scenario in terms of carbon fluxes and carbon stocks. We can see here that the NbS scenario is more efficient than the business as usual, and thus is better for the Global Climate Regulation Service. And what about the coastal protection? The next slide, yes. Well, we have selected here a pilot site of around 5 kilometers long coastal stretch, where it has been recorded a retreat of the fall dune of 49 centimeters per year from 2001 to 2013. This represents a loss of more than 30,000 square meters in that period. In this business as usual scenario, we lose half a meter of dunes each year. Finally, for the flood regulation, we have performed also geographical information system analysis in the next slide. And in flood events where the waters rise to 2.5 meters above the sea level, and these events have already been registered, around 1.5 million of square meters of built areas are potentially affected. Well, now let's move into step 3 of our assessment. This step includes the economic valuation of the benefits of a nature-based solution. First of all, for the global climate regulation, we have performed a forecast, a 50-year forecast for the prices in current carbon markets based on historical data of European Union allowance. For the coastal protection valuation, the next slide, we have used data included in the ESVD, Ecosystem Services Valuation Database. And here you have the reference for that. We have also performed a 50-year forecast for this service. Finally, for the flow regulation, however, we haven't been able to perform a quantitative valuation. This is in the next slide. Given the difficulty of assessing the real damages caused by floods. One thing is that waters reach built areas, and another one is foreseeing the actual damages they may cause. Let's move into the next step in our assessment. We have used the cost estimation of these nature-based solutions that we are proposing. And these are the Global Climate Regulation Service, which is the recovery of the natural marshland. That includes earthworks with heavy machinery, as you can see in the picture. And using data from previous works, we've estimated the costs of it in around 1.5 thousand euros per hectare. The good news is that once you've got the natural marshland, you don't need any maintenance, and so it means that no further investment is needed, since natural marshes are self-regulated. And what about the costs for dune restoration or dune protection? Well, in the next slide, we see a table where we've got the detailed figures for each action, including the maintenance costs. So in our 50-year period, the estimated costs for the whole area sum up to 1.5 million euros. And now, time to settle up. Let's see the balance between costs and benefits. And here you can see that our NbS scenario for global climate regulation service would yield between 2.3 and 4.9 million euros, depending on the areas considered. This depends on current management plans that has zones within the natural park. You know, there are allowed and prohibited activities in different areas within the natural park. So it depends on how many hectares you can work on. The benefits would be different. Doing the same exercise for the Coastal Protection Service, we obtain the next results. And the next slide, yes. And these are over 3,000 million euros for our 50-year period. So what we have here is that nature-based solutions are, depending on how you develop them, very interesting in monetary terms. Finally, the next slide, it's time to communicate and share all these thoughts and results with the society. We have done so through relevant stakeholders, but also through mass media and through online events like this one we are involved here today. That's it. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you so much, Jesus, and thank you again, Vanya. We now have time for questions. There haven't been any in the chat so far that I've seen, but the floor is open if you do have any questions for any of our speakers. I'll give you a minute to think about it.
Hello.
Hello.
This is Kostas Kaloudis from the island of Corfu in Greece. I have a question to Vanya, I think, but possibly others could answer as well. My question is about how to handle the communication with regard to costs and benefits if after an analysis the costs for the implementation of the nature-based solution seem to be quite high, and the benefits are more long-term than immediate and very direct, and particularly when you talk about climate change. Still, I would say in Mediterranean countries, policy and decision makers are not used to thinking so long term. So how would you suggest this is handled overall?
Okay, thank you for your question. Concerning cost, we know the point is that today nothing has been done So costs are quite low because nothing is done, and local stakeholders are aware that if you don't do anything, you don't have cost, but you don't have also preservation and valorization of the site. So you need to expand. And the point in our case is that as in several Italian regions, we have the money from the European community, for example, and in some cases we are not able to use or to use correctly this money. So local stakeholders are really aware of that. So they are not scared about cost. Concerning the long-term benefits, well, it could seem a long term, but we spoke about 2040, so only 18 years. So it's not so such a long term. And in the next few years, we saw how climate change completely changed the area. Before 2014, there was not floods or relevant floods in the area. From 2013 to 2020, there was 3 large floods with several consequences, also people that was killed by floods. So people is really scared about that. And they think that in the next future, there will be new floods with strong negative consequences, higher damages. They are so scared for their lives. So I don't think that this is a problem. The main point is to demonstrate for us that investing in nature-based solutions today could offset the damages that could happen if we continue doing nothing. So not expanding, but also doing nothing. So I don't think that this is not a problem. I anticipated the result speaking with the local companies. They are really happy that our study demonstrated that we need to act, and so to spend, to invest in preserving nature, and especially invest in nature-based solutions. So I don't think that apparently these numbers are difficult, but if you can read the numbers, they are not difficult. And of course, it depends on the contest. Our contest is a very big, very leader contest. We know each stakeholder, and so we know also their expectation on our studies and our work. So
sorry, if I can complete just a little, but in the part 2 of the guidelines, in the last part, in section 5, I think, we talk about the communication and the engagement of stakeholders. So don't hesitate to consult this document, which gives you a very practical and very concrete guidelines for those problems.
Thank you.
Yeah, we hope that Vanya has well answered your question.
Yes.
So as we wait for other questions to come in, we have also put up some questions here for all of you on the screen for you to consider. Maybe that'll inspire some thoughts as well. And that's about my limit of being comfortable with uncomfortable silence. So I'm going to start wrapping up. If you do think of any questions, feel free to send an email across to any of the speakers. Can I just ask the speakers to put, oh, Kostas has another question. Okay. Please.
It's more of an open query than a question, I would say. So in touristic islands or coastal areas like where I come from, we often face the issue of tourism investments being favored instead of environmental management and preservation. So because there are some specific cases I am and want to work on, if anyone has any analyses, like mostly cost-benefit analysis, but also interestingly for NbS, if any, that juxtapose costs and benefits of a tourism investment as compared to nature preservation in an area, I would be interested to know, because I'm trying to quantify, how we what the benefits of protecting nature in a place that is saturated already by tourism investment can actually benefit the island.
Thank you, Kostas. I think maybe I can answer your question. Thanks. Maybe we can get in touch because we at Vertical Lab we have a full list of different references that we can provide you with. We've done some studies, for example, in Haiti, where we've evaluated all the ecosystem services, and I think I can remember tourism was one of them. I'm not too sure, but for sure the Conservatoire du Littoral, we've done heaps of studies, so we can provide you with the results that we have. So if you want to get in touch with us directly, then we can provide you with all those references.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And trying to answer also one of these questions on the list that Hani gave us, I think for us here, a main challenge in conducting a study is exactly this, that is in fact that the situation that most other commercial activities have been abandoned. For example, salt production has been abandoned for the sake of tourism. So it's hard to find any more people who work on these activities and earn income in order to have beneficiaries for the nature-based solution. And it seems a bit difficult to overcome this. And even fishing actually is not as strong a sector as it used to be. Also due to overfishing, fishermen face problems. So it's a kind of a declining economic activity. So then you would have, at least for now, they would need at least encouragement in order to see the prospects for the future, I think.
Maybe just to understand a little bit your case, in which frame are you, do you want to do this ecosystem service assessment? Is it in the frame of a private study or NGO? I don't know. Or...
The latter comments were more general, thinking of various examples here and there. But yeah, for let's say about the salt marshes, I mean the salt lake, I would do it in order to request, it's a Natura area, so I would possibly, as an NGO, I would request from authorities to take action in order to prevent the area from being eroded, being better managed environmentally, etc. There are some interesting local stakeholders like the fishermen, but as I said, they're not as strong as in the past. So you would have to argue a lot for the environment, I guess, but without so many big allies.
Yeah.
If I can add something, yes, of course, it's not easy to take into account all the elements. For example, when you're speaking about the fishing sector, you need to make some hypotheses, because if you take into account all the elements, it could be not easy to estimate the future value, because there is the pollution, invasive species, and in some cases you don't know exactly how the invasive species interact with the local species, how they could affect or not. So it's not easy to have a plan. There could be also other element like socio-demographic condition that could affect. My suggestion is to focus on one aspect, I don't know, climate change or reduce pollution, and estimate the value if you do something, concentrating on one thing, because to interact all the elements could be really, really complex. Yeah. I don't know if Clementine and Selma and Joanna agree, but my suggestion is to work on making some hypotheses, knowing that the real future scenario could be really complex, but we cannot be able to manage this such complexity, especially if we need to forecast the future.
Yes, I agree, and the principle of our methodology is really to simplify and to make a strong hypothesis, but to be able to efficiently and like quite quickly make economic assumptions. So yeah, that's exactly this.
Okay, so I think that on that note, we can start wrapping up. I just would like to ask our speakers to jot their emails down in the chat for everyone in case people think of questions afterwards. And meanwhile, I will also be sharing the links to the guidelines on the Economics of NbS again. So make sure you have a look at that. In September this year, we'll also be publishing the policy brief on the economics of nature-based solutions. So we'll keep you posted and send you this brief once it's ready. We also have some updates coming up for TESA. That's the Toolkit for Ecosystem Service Site-Based Assessment, which enables the conservation practitioners and land managers and businesses to assess ecosystem services and to value them in monetary but also non-monetary terms using a step-by-step guidance with practical methods. A new version of this of the TESA Toolkit will be released at the very end of 2022, so end of this year, but you can download the second version of this in the link in the chat that I'm about to put in, and we'll also be sending a recording of this webinar as well as the PowerPoint via email. So I'm just going to put that down, and thank you again so much to all of you for joining us, and thank you to our speakers as well.
Thank you, Fanny.
It was very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.